Hello, everybody. I'm Lou Dobbs, and welcome to the Great America Show. As you know, we're all about the American way and truth and justice for all. Right now in Atlanta, there's an injustice. There's a hearing underway challenging Marjorie Taylor Greene's re-election candidacy because a handful of voters in her congressional district, which she won by an almost 50% margin in 2020, who, with the able help of Soros-funded group called Free Speech for People, claimed she encouraged and supported Capitol rioters on January 6th. An Obama-appointed judge ruled that the case had to move forward, even though two other similar challenges against Congressman Jim Banks and Madison Cawthorn were dismissed. The leftist-inspired challenge, not only based on a ridiculous and novel interpretation of the 14th Amendment, they're purely theatrical nonsense. But such is the Marxist left, and there seems to be no penalty for their nonsense. Our guest tonight is very familiar with the Marxist left in this country and all that they do, and in particular, the role they play in leaving our borders wide open, a Justice Department that is hard left, defying daily the Constitution and the law. Our guest is Tom Fitton. He's the president of Judicial Watch, one of the most important government watchdog organizations in America. Tom, it's great to have you back with us here on the Great America Show.
Hey, Lou, good to be with you again. Thanks for having me.
Well, we're delighted, and we're delighted with the work that Judicial Watch does. I know you're doing a lot of things on the election, in addition to your always expanding portfolio, but the election's now about 6 months away. This is critical. Tell us the latest on Judicial Watch and the initiatives you have underway.
You know, one of the key aspects that the left has been focused on have been the alleged horrible gerrymanders by Republicans, which I've been skeptical of largely, although not completely, because, you know, Republicans aren't perfect either. But one of the worst gerrymanders, which is kind of the jiggering of congressional seats in order to help the party running it, was in Maryland. And Maryland had a gerrymander that was roundly criticized by both, frankly, Democrats and Republicans. But it didn't stop the supermajority of Democrats in the legislature from shoveling it through. And we challenged it in court on behalf of voters in every district in Maryland, and we won. The court said it was an extreme partisan gerrymander under the Maryland Constitution. And they went back to the drawing board and came up with a better map. It was remarkable in the sense that we got a victory. It was straightforward, and now we get to move on.
Well, thank you for your success, and a critically important success, because we're headed toward what we hope will not be a rerun of the rigged election of 2020. Let me ask you for I want to say one other thing before we move beyond gerrymandering and the work you're doing on districts. In Florida, it's my understanding that DeSantis has succeeded in drawing new lines, which eliminated, let me put it another way, gave the Republicans 4 more districts in point of fact, and thereby has closed with those in Maryland. The Judicial Watch succeeded at the 4 in Florida. This means that the two parties are exactly equal now nationwide in advantage. Your thoughts?
Well, you know, in many ways, this is not the way it should be. You know, the parties game the system a little bit. You know, it's not illegal to engage in, quote, gerrymandering per se. But when you abuse the system and you know, for instance, in Maryland, they had, I think, 35% of the voters are Republicans, and they came up with a gerrymander that gave essentially one district to the Republicans. You know, that obviously wasn't fair. And now the left likes to pretend that Republicans are gerrymandering maps based on race, and sometimes that's true. In Florida, they had a district in the northern area of Florida, you may recall, that kind of cut across the top of the state. And I think it was very narrow and long across the top of the state. And our experts said, you know, that's not right. And DeSantis said it's not right. And he had to fight Republicans on it.
Mm-hmm.
Because as you might imagine, keeping certain voters in certain districts can benefit both parties sometimes, right?
Right. And both parties seek that advantage.
Right. And sometimes it's based on race, and that's certainly not right. So, we don't want generally politicians getting to pick the voters. It should be the other way around. And, and just quickly before you move on, I know you
Sure.
want to talk about other topics, but we had this big settlement in North Carolina, or we ended a lawsuit after North Carolina on a related issue cleaned up over 425,000 names from their list after we sued.
Mm.
So, there you've got significant more clean election lists in Florida, thanks to a Judicial Watch federal lawsuit. Other lawsuits are ongoing and more are coming. So this is this long way of saying I'm still worried about the future elections.
Right.
Our lists are dirty. The left hates election integrity measures. And so they'll take any, to me, they're going to try to take advantage of the rule changes from 2020 to try to game and rig the system again.
Your judgment on how well and I'm talking now because Republicans were the victims of the rigged election constructed by the Democrats in 2020. Now, every fool in the country can argue with me about it being a rigged election. They can argue till whatever freezes over. But the fact of the matter is, that's what it was in at least 5 states, and I think in quite a few more. So what I also see is an indolent RNC that is not energized, animated about changing the 2020 changes back to a sensible election day system across the country, expanding drop boxes, expanding absentee ballot deadlines. This idiocy has to be removed, I think, before the election. So far, I don't know that is the effort or the initiative of the Republican Party. Your thoughts?
Well, I think in some states they've made some advancements there. Georgia has not been perfect, far from it, but even their weak reforms have been attacked by the left. Texas had more significant reforms. But I agree. For instance, we've kind of codified in too many states, even though we've added some security measures, the vote by mail menace, which is, in my view, the very opposite of fairly administered elections in terms of undermining confidence. If everyone's getting ballots in the mail, you don't know how those ballots are being handled. And it just increases opportunities for fraud and undermine confidence in the system. It's not so much, and the left pretends that you have to prove fraud in order to be concerned about election administration. No, you don't. You need to highlight the fact, and quite fairly, that if elections are run with virtually no security measures that anyone can rely upon, why should we trust the results?
Yeah, if there is no system of election integrity, there is a system of potential fraud. It's that straightforward. And by the way, that's even become the law as interpreted and practiced by the Justice Department when it goes out seeking consent decrees and when it resists as a body voter identification and talks about discrimination and the result of having to have a photograph. I mean, the Justice Department is itself an inland sea of idiocy when it comes to election law and election integrity. I just don't understand how this cannot be fixed and now.
Well, this Justice Department isn't going to do anything. It's controlled by the radical left. Arguably, it was controlled by the radical left during the Trump administration, and
yes,
his attorney generals didn't really kind of comprehend that or get their heads around it. So instead of enforcing election laws, for instance, we're talking about cleaning up the election list. We know it's a national problem. We know the states aren't doing the basic steps to clean up the rolls as federal law requires. We also know the Justice Department has zero interest in enforcing the law. So we're coming in to do it. And in the case of states that are trying to take steps to have stricter regulation of vote in order to secure them better, you have the Justice Department coming in and challenging them. For instance, in Texas, this voter ID issue. I mean, the Justice Department has taken the position that voter ID is to be challenged all the time. So, it's a battle tooth and nail for clean and fair elections. And in my view, Lou, is like the long game here, if not the medium game, is for the left to end elections. They don't like elections. It's just like they pretend to like the First Amendment, but in the end, they really don't, and they prefer to make themselves immune from it.
Yep.
So they're doing the same with elections.
Yeah. The First Amendment, the Second Amendment, they don't like much anything. I mean, we can go through the list. The Bill of Rights is an annoyance overall to the left. When we examine, not even closely, but examine cursorily what is happening in the country, we're looking at a border that's wide open. Illegal immigration is soaring as it never has in our history before. We have a president who is getting away with dropping Title 42, which means an end to the remain in Mexico, to immediate expulsion to home countries and to Mexico. The odds are that so say the border security groups, 600,000 a month. That works out to about 7 million a year, on top of the 2.5 to 3.5 million already coming through. We're looking at changing this nation fundamentally in the course of about 36 months, aren't we?
Yeah, Lou. I mean, you highlight the significant consequences of this invasion in the long term. And of course, you got the short term issue of the public health, which is what Title 42 is about, national security, just basic crime, and human trafficking, sex trafficking, and of course the cartels, which are chiefly concerned with moving drugs across the border, and they control the southern border, certainly the Mexican side, and they're the dog that wags the tail on the on our side. I mean, Chris Farrell, who you know, Chris,
sure.
My colleague, he runs our investigations team. He was just down on the border, and he learned over the last year there had been 9,000 documented drone overflights by the cartels of U.S. border operations. So we're facing a paramilitary organization with bureaucrats, more or less. I mean, God bless the ICE and CBP, but they're not equipped to deal with this and respond to it. And then, of course, we're relying on the poor sheriffs and local law enforcement in the states to come up and clean up the mess, because the feds can't take care of all these people. So it's the states that need to do it, or end up doing it, or the local sheriffs. And this is what I would think. Look, we've got an invasion. The federal government's abandoned its constitutional duty to protect those states from invasion, and the Constitution specifically allows for compacts without approval by Congress for situations such as this. The states can get together and secure their borders, and that's what they should do.
Yeah, and they have, under the Constitution, a right to, if indeed this is successfully labeled an invasion by whatever definition. When you're talking about people crossing your border by millions without authorization, they are invading. Even though Greg Abbott in Texas is not responding specifically to that issue in the Constitution, he is doing something on his own.
No, it isn't, and he's a little late to the game on this, as usual, because he's that type of Republican. But the steps he took, for instance, in interdicting trucks, I mean, that's the sort of escalation in creative thinking that we need on the border. We got to think of ways to protect. I mean, if I were a governor, I would be desperate to think of everything and anything I could do to protect their citizens. So certainly in the border region. And of course, it's Oklahoma, it's Arkansas, DeSantis, it's such an East Coast approach. Immigration policy is so East Coast, right? Because we're here in the district, or Maryland and New York, it might as well be happening in Timbuktu.
Right.
But this border region is a lot closer to a lot more people than just Texas. So when you hear noises in Alabama and Florida and Arkansas and Mississippi and Louisiana and Oklahoma and just north of Arizona and such, you're this is not, it's a hop, skip, and a jump. And of course, they're flying people straight into White Plains. So, but what New York has largely lost in terms of their ability to deal with any internal immigration enforcement, because the local politicians are aiding and abetting it just as badly as the Biden administration is.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, New York is the People's Republic of New York. Make no make no mistake about it, folks. New York is left wing. I think this is true. Every bit is left wing. Is Illinois, perhaps not California, but very left wing and headed in all the wrong ways and directions. I want to go back to what you said about those 9,000 drone flights surveilling law enforcement down in Texas that Chris Farrell discovered. We haven't heard anything about that. And what has been the response of the Border Patrol, DEA, and other agencies operating down there under the surveillance of the cartels?
Well, I mean, if the administration were serious about enforcement, they'd be counter programming, I guess. They'd be countervailing it.
How about shooting them out of the air?
Yeah, well, if they're little, I don't know technically how feasible or what is the feasible response to it, but you can bet they're not even thinking about it. I mean, right. My guess is the agents on the ground, it's just another fact of life they have to deal with. I mean, they know exactly what's happening. The drone goes over there. They see where the Border Patrol is. So they just move their people to somewhere else.
Right. And there, by the way, all of the nonsense and the bull, who is it? Mike McCall, when he was chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, was all excited about sensors. And every rhino you hear will be talking to you about sensors and surveillance and drones and yabba yabba. Meanwhile, the only people using technology are the bad guys. They've been pulled back so far from the border, millions of people in Biden's first year, 2 million illegal immigrants cross the border. I love it. They rack that up as an encounter with the Border Patrol, and 1.6 million of them, according to Mark Morgan, the former commissioner of Customs and Border Protection, 1.6 million were released by the Biden administration into this country without so much as a howdy do.
Well, those are the ones that are caught. I mean, the getaways or the gotaways are an exponential factor of those who are interdicted and let out, like, as you point out, essentially not turned back as it is. So, it's a free for all. And of course, these aliens and the drug cartels that smuggle them in aren't going to stop as long as there's no consequence or no effective protection of our sovereignty there. And so, to me, this is an eminently impeachable offense. The fact that Republicans aren't talking about it, there are a few good ones that are doing it. I mean, there's a harder core group than there used to be in the House. Some of our friends have gone a little bit soft, but McCarthy is afraid of impeachment. Certainly, Mitch McConnell is never going to countenance impeachment. But if the rule of law and our nation's sovereignty means anything, and what would it mean to allow a president to knowingly aid and abet and help foreign nationals enter the country illegally and then move them around the country so they're able to settle with tax dollars?
Yeah.
If that's not impeachable, I don't know what would be.
Well, what would be with a rhino? Nothing.
Yeah.
Both names that you've just mentioned, Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy, and they are pushing McCarthy hard to be the Speaker of the House if this red wave election comes to pass. And you know what's going to happen? Not a thing. McCarthy is a rhino and an establishment tool to the bone. He's never been anything else. He is straight in the lineage of John Boehner to Paul Ryan to Kevin McCarthy. It's all the same tree. It's all the same sap. It's pathetic. And the Republicans fear upsetting the apple cart, or if you will, making a splash with the wave, because they don't want to do anything to lose. And playing to lose is the perfect way for the Republican Party to always snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. Don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, I should say the danger is, Republicans will probably win in November, at least on the House, because the politics are such that they would they would have to work hard to lose. But the question is, what are they going to do with the House victory? And is it going to be more of the same, where Republicans tell conservative voters who put them in, "Oh no, we can't do anything now. We have to wait for 2024."
Well, the Republicans are going to create a third party. If they screw this up this year, a third party will arise so powerful and so quickly that their heads will spin. And then we'll see what happens to the Republican Party and all the creeps that run it. I mean, we've reached a level, I hope, of intolerance in this country, of this kind of incompetence, this kind of shallow, talentless leaders. 70 people say the country's headed in the wrong direction. The Republicans think that's all about Joe Biden. No, that's about Mitch McConnell as well. It's about Kevin McCarthy. It's about Ronna McDaniel. The Democratic National Committee is under indictment right now. And that's about the only way in which you could say that the Republican National Committee is somehow better than the DNC. What do you think?
Yeah, I try to avoid the party analysis as running a seed like Judicial Watch does. But, my experience is that, as a citizen and observer of DC, is that there's a disconnect between the current Republican leadership, or much of the current Republican leadership, and the voters that put them in office. And as long as that disconnect continues, unless the leadership starts reflecting the values of the people who put them in office, it's going to be trying times for folks like you and me, Lou.
Yeah, I'm afraid so. I'm afraid so. I'm frightened of the prospects for this country right now, because we are putting up with a man who takes orders from a bunny on an Easter roll. I mean, what in the hell are we doing? And people chortle about it. They laugh about it. And this man is the president of the United States, and he has at his side an absolutely equally incompetent, inept, and devoid of any apparent knowledge, Kamala Harris, the vice president. The Republican Party at least put up known, tried leaders, and the Democratic Party should absolutely be indicted, impeached, whatever it takes for their failure to put up decent leadership, decent people who have intelligence, talent, and some gift to run a government. It's incredible that we are tolerating this nonsense. It's just disgusting. Your thoughts?
Well, the challenge for the Democrats is that they have the corrupt corporatist wing, of which Biden is the representative, and then they have the rising communist wing, right? The AOCs and the radicals like Elizabeth Warren. And then, and Clinton is, tries to keep both feet in both camps as well. My view is Biden's got significant political problems in that regard. He has little moral claim on the presidency. Half the country rejects it because of the compromised 2020 elections. And on top of that, you've got this corruption crisis that Biden, the media is helping him with, but they're whistling past the graveyard on it. I mean, it wasn't just the Easter punny who came to town in Washington this week at the White House. It was Hunter Biden. He showed up. This is a man who's under criminal investigation for bribery, money laundering, foreign agent violations, and tax fraud. And he shows his face at the White House.
Yeah.
And with little, now it's the president's son. Is that surprising? No. But what is surprising, the yawn from the corrupt media that would have went apoplectic if it was a similarly situated conservative/Republican president.
Amazing. And when you talk about Hunter Biden, the laptop, the question becomes, when you talk about the investigation that the U.S. Attorney in Delaware has been carrying on, think about this. You're a man of many investigations with great experience. Have you ever heard of the Justice Department taking 4 years to investigate corruption, felonious behavior on the part of significant public figures? Or is this just another case of what I think the Justice Department has become, a burial ground for truth?
There's a little bit of irony here, Lou. I think the Biden investigation was shut down during the Trump administration and somehow got going during the Biden administration. Barr shut it down during the campaign. He made it clear he didn't want anything done substantially. And then Biden came in, and the Justice Department had no choice but to proceed because everyone knew they had the Hunter laptop. The problem with the Justice Department is because you've got Garland, who's a federal judge, and he kind of knows what the rules are. So that's a problem for the radicals in the Justice Department. And the rules in the Justice Department are that there is special counsel be appointed when there's a conflict of interest. There's obviously a conflict of interest with investigating Hunter, especially since some of the crimes implicate Joe Biden. In the least, he's a witness. Frankly, he should be a target. And in those circumstances, there has to be a special counsel. And I don't know what type of job this person's doing in Delaware, but I do know that a special counsel is necessary, irrespective of what they're doing, because that's what we were told for years under Trump. You can't have the president being investigated by his own Justice Department. We need a special counsel.
Let's talk about William Barr. The American people, because the corporatist, elitist media, leftist media, will not focus on what Barr has already admitted. He admitted that he knew that a presidential candidate was lying about the laptop and about his role with that laptop in a presidential debate in front of millions and millions of people, tens of millions, because he didn't want to intervene in an election. Tom, what do you make of that? What would you think that an attorney general, the chief law enforcement officer in the country, what was he afraid of? Was he afraid of intervening in an election? Or was he afraid that his buddies down at the university club, or whichever one he belongs to in Washington, would chide him for supporting Donald Trump, who just happens to be the president of the United States?
Well, that's the pretend Justice Department rule out there, right, Lou? That they don't intervene in elections, which, of course, is not what the rule ought to be if you're fairly administering justice. You don't let elections keep you from doing an investigation.
There you go.
You don't time investigations to elections. And when you refuse to intervene because of an election, that's putting your thumb on the scale the opposite way, just as much as intervening because of an election to advance an electoral process. So this is why, again, Barr failed to understand what is, in my view, what his responsibilities were, which was to make sure the law would be pursued irrespective of politics. And obviously, you don't say, hey, let's time an indictment to the week before an election like Lawrence Welch did. Remember the special counsel on Iran-Contra who
absolutely, who could forget, right?
Helped put Bill Clinton in office. So there.
By the way, just so the audience knows, Walsh intervened on the final Friday before the election of 1992. That's how clear it was.
He indicted Cap Weinberger, then who was a Secretary of Defense for Reagan, and implicated and suggested that George Bush, who was running for re-election, had done something wrong the Friday before the election.
Yeah.
And here you had, in the summer before the election, Barr refusing to allow investigations into the president's son to go forward. But that's it's not even a question. I mean, first of all, the other side has no rules, and then we follow rules that make no sense. So it's not even.
It's true. It's absolutely true. And then Barr, who President Trump correctly and succinctly stated is a weak man. That's who we're talking about, but that's the man he put in that job. And what I still don't understand are the number of people who work in Washington, who live in Washington, Tom, who will say, when I criticize Barr because A, he didn't get anything done. B, he chickened out when he should have been at his bravest and most courageous. He did not investigate an election that I don't care what his basis was for saying it was a perfect election. It was not. And he knew that. He had to know what was going on all the way around, 360 degrees. And he didn't allow his FBI, his Justice Department to investigate what were clear irregularities, anomalies, and use of private funds to drive, at the cost of hundreds of millions of dollars, the Democratic vote in five of Wisconsin's largest cities, for example. That doesn't even include Georgia and Arizona and Nevada and Pennsylvania. But anyway,
I disagree with Trump. I don't think Barr was weak. I think he was stubborn and quite strong when it came to, just doing what he wanted to do, irrespective of what the law and the facts and history might require of him. By the way, there's a certain consistency to he does what he wanted to do. For instance, he was insistent on getting rid of Mueller. I mean, it was clear he wanted to shut that down. He wasn't weak then. But when he decides he doesn't want to do something, or he decides it's not in the best interest of the institution of the Justice Department as he sees it, he's not going to cede to any other interpretation, including the interpretation of the president, who's, in my view, whose orders, as long as they're lawful, should be followed.
Absolutely. He is the president. And this idea that somehow the Justice Department and the FBI are independent agencies, independent of responsibility to the president of the United States, the chief executive, where in the heck did they come up with that rule? And by the way, they didn't hesitate in either the FBI, the CIA, NSA, you name it. They didn't hesitate when the president's people under Barack Obama decided they would start concocting nonsense and creating a dossier and a faux Russian collusion conspiracy to stop Donald Trump as a candidate, then overthrow him as a president, get him impeached twice. I mean, it goes on. And now January 6th, Tom, this is 7 years of political persecution and outrageous criminal conspiracy on the part of the Democratic Party, the Obama administration's intelligence chiefs, and throughout the FBI, rancid, pervasive, disgusting, appalling corruption worthy of a cartel, a Mexican drug cartel.
Well, I mean, what we're seeing is like the operation, practically speaking, and I know it's not literally speaking, but practically you have a one-party state apparatus targeting its opposition. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean that political opponents don't rise to high office like the presidency, or, the Senate is split and there are significant numbers of Republicans in the House. But you have this one-party state apparatus trying to target, jail, spy on its political opponents. And they're doing it from the highest to the lowest, from President Trump to, some volunteer who wanted to be an alternate slate, an alternate member of an electoral slate that would compete with the slate that was disputed in states like Wisconsin and elsewhere. There's nothing too petty that they won't target. Look at the way some of these January 6th defendants have been treated. We had a woman killed in the Capitol for no good reason, Ashley Babbitt.
Right.
And it's been a big yawn. So look, they don't care if you get killed. They don't care about your rights. That's how awful this crowd is.
Yeah, they are awful. And the American people are tolerating it. They're being told everything's just fine. The Democrats are patting people on the head. They know that they've got, and I'm going to name names and groups. I mean, the African-American vote in this country is tied to the Democratic Party beyond all reason or rationality. What the Democratic Party has done to that socioeconomic racial group is appalling. And Donald Trump said, "What have you got to lose?" And he was right. What do you have to lose? And what they have become is a reliable vote for corruption, absolutely un-American attacks on our very institutions that preserve freedom and liberty for us as citizens, and through the Marxism that is the hallmark of every major initiative by this White House and corporate America now, and it seems, every nonprofit in the country, an effort to destroy the family, to destroy American values of decency and life itself. It's horrible. It's a horrific moment in time, because we should be more worried, absolutely, about China than we are Russia. But we should not for one moment think that the dangers, the threats, are any less from within. This is at least the same level. The extremists within our society on the left who mean to destroy us are at the same level as communist China's external threat. Don't you think?
Well, I mean, it's this transnational extremist left, and they're operating in China. They're operating, yes, in Russia. The irony of the Ukraine-Russia situation is I'm just waiting for the worm to turn, where all of a sudden, for the left, it's the Ukrainians that need to be attacked and opposed, while the Russians need to be supported. I mean, every position politically of the extreme left in this country is purely tactical and short-term and unprincipled. And when you're seeking to destroy the nation, undo our government, act in, and I don't call it unconstitutional, anti-constitutional ways, you're doing it that it's this transnational left. They all have the same approach, and there's different flavors of it. The Chinese communist flavor, the Russian strongman flavor, the internationalist flavor in Europe, and of course the AOC type flavor here in the United States. But they're all drinking from the same fountain of anti-Americanism, communism, Marxism, as you point out, that it would be so destructive to the American way of life.
Yeah, and destructive of the family is the fundamental foundation of the American dream. And the American middle class. It just a moment where we were making considerable progress, building a middle class, African Americans joining that middle class, Hispanics joining that middle class. The decision was made somewhere along the way by the Democratic Party that is just a little too comfortable and a little too close for their liking, and they have swung hard left, Marxist left, and are encouraging not only universities and professors and teachers unions, but also Wall Street and corporate America to join them in the Marxist binge that could just simply overturn our foundational institutions and values.
No, it's a clear and present danger, and I worry for the Democrat Party. My concern is that we have a major political party in the country that is being largely controlled by this anti-American left. And, we can't allow our country, it's one thing to have Democrats who, or people who are liberals say they want higher taxes, they want to preserve Social Security, the typical debates we have. Mm-hmm. But it's gone from, we want higher taxes to we want to confiscate the wealth of Americans by name. It's now a tenet of this party to target sex talk at school children by teachers. It's now a tenet of this party, and it used not to be a tenet because there were pro-life Republican Democrats, to support abortion throughout the entire 9 months of pregnancy and beyond, paid for with tax dollars. So this extremism is remarkable and problematic. I worry about the Republicans, but I also worry about the Democrats because there are tens of millions of Democrats who deserve better representation for their liberal values as opposed to the left-wing values that the leadership is now advocating for.
Well, Tom, why not let them become Republicans?
Well, yeah,
The Democrats are, what they deserve to be. Their leadership deserves to be in jail.
I knew that was going to get you, Lou.
Oh, it got me. It got me because we need in this party, the Republican Party, to start. What the other thing, Tom, when you're commiserating for the Democrats who are being led by monsters, and I mean Marxist monsters without question, and a puppet by the name of Biden who walks around without purpose or knowledge of where he is or where he's going or where he's being. It's so clear. And no one talks about, is this not maybe just a little dangerous for a superpower to have an inept, clearly impaired old man wandering the White House thinking that he is king of the world? Isn't that a little problem? And isn't it another problem when the rest of the world thinks that he thinks he's the king of the world? It's frightening to the bone, is it not?
Well, certainly that would be part of Putin's calculations when he was considering whether to invade Ukraine. I mean,
I'm only surprised he didn't invade the United States. We look helpless and foolish and ignorant. I mean, we look bizarre to the world. Why would you not just simply march the Russian army through, the Canyon of Heroes? Who's going to stop them?
That's right.
The Democrats say they won't fight, no matter what, even if we're invaded by Russia. I mean, who is going to stand up for America in this country? When we commiserate with the damn Democrats, who are the most evil political party in the history of this country, they're trying to destroy the country, are they not?
Well, certainly again, I don't want to get too partisan here.
I don't want you to be partisan, just honest.
I'll let you be the partisan.
I'll be the partisan.
That the leadership of our parties is corrupted. The Democrats, as you point out, they've got this this destructive leftism that is animating. That is the energy behind their party right now, right? That's very dangerous to the country.
Yeah,
and it used to not be that way. I mean, it used to be that crowd was kept in a corner or up in the attic and trotted out at an academic conference or two. Now they've given the keys to the car. And as you highlight, it's extremely dangerous and it has worldwide consequences. And, you've got the cognitive challenges of Biden that obviously everyone sees except American news media.
Yeah.
And then B, the ethical challenges. When Putin is calculating, he sees a corrupt, weak American presidency. And how does he know it's corrupt? Because it was his gang that was giving him money.
Yeah. Yeah. And lying about it all the while, saying they were giving. And here's the only place they had that right. It is Russian disinformation. Putin wanted Hillary Clinton to be president. But the disinformation was actually coming from the intelligence organizations to the American people. We get more disinformation campaigns. We are the subject of more disinformation campaigns in this country from our own damn government than we are from either China or from Russia or Iran. Are we not?
Yes. And the intelligence community, who do you think the chief market for different disinformation campaigns are if you're a foreign adversary? Not the people. Your enemies running the government, your intelligence establishments. They're the ones who they're trying to fool. They're the ones who they're trying to game. And in the case of the Russia disinformation, which continues to this day, they're still talking about it, Lou. They haven't moved away from it at all. They haven't moved away from it at all. I mean, it's our discussions about Ukraine. It's like if you are skeptical of anything related to Russia and the Ukraine, and, I think Russia's invasion of Ukraine was outrageous. But now it's like, unless you're willing to go and fight in Ukraine for Russia, you're Trump, you're part of the Trump conspiracy. It's crazy.
Well, I'd rather be.
I see more Ukrainian flags now than American flags on Twitter.
We actually had 40 Republican senators sign a letter demanding demanding a no-fly zone be established. 40 Republican senators. And by the way, that's all the usual suspects and a dozen rational human beings. But that's it. 40 of them. At the same time, we've got Chris, and by the way, that would be Putin said very clearly it would be an act of war to establish a no-fly zone over Ukraine, and he would be right. And then we have Chris Cohn sitting on Face the Nation this weekend, who managed to secularize the holiest day for all of Christianity so that he could cry out for the people who've been killed in Ukraine. And that is a foundation to send our troops to Ukraine. It was outrageous. And there was not a single response, reaction from Margaret Brennan, the host of the podcast. He has just insulted Christians by saying that Easter is the day for we celebrate the human spirit and grieve for the victims of COVID. I mean, what? What in the world? Who decided to define Easter in those terms? It is the day of resurrection. It is the day in which we receive forgiveness for our sins and those of us who believe in Jesus Christ, eternal life. And for that to happen on corporatist media, flagrantly secularizing our holiday, do that to Muslims, do that to Islam, and see what happens. But from us, nothing. No. And it's already today. Unbelievable.
Well, I'm thinking about the Kunzes of the world. This is the establishment that gave us the Ukraine invasion. They're the ones who misapprehended what the Russians were capable of, what their goals were, what they would react to. They misapprehended the strength of the Ukrainian people in responding to an invasion, which meant that they didn't provide the necessary weaponry and supplies that they could have supplied early on. And even as the war continued, and it looks like, what little they were giving them was having an impact, you would have thought that they were, being asked to dig into their own pockets personally as they were handing out material and supplies to the Ukrainians. So it's like the worst of all worlds. It's like this rhetoric that suggests that Russia's the worst thing since Hitler, while this lack of action to confront it. So it's this moral preening combined with weakness that gets people killed. And my view is if it's in the national security interest of the United States for Russia to lose in Ukraine, which I believe it is, then you would be taking different steps. Doesn't mean deploying troops, but you wouldn't, months after the fact, start sending in weaponry that you should have been sending in months before the fact.
Yes.
And no one's being held accountable for them failing to apprehend what was going on. Trillions of dollars have been spent on our national security establishment to stop a war in Europe, and we have one.
Yeah.
Where's the accountability for that, Lou?
Well, again, accountability. We don't want to admit that this is the White House now is its inhabitants are evil, they're inept, they're impaired, and they're puppets. And the only issue is, who is it that benefits from pulling their strings in the direction they have? Because their agenda is to, without an exception, a Marxist agenda, destructive of everything American, energy independence, destructive of our public education system, and supportive of a Marxist radical Dem set of teachers unions. It's just, we're under assault from within. We're under assault from without. And when we have Republicans lining up with the left to go after, to put our troops in Ukraine, it is sickening to me that they would risk a single human life to do so. Their responsibilities are of a different nature. Support the Ukrainians who proved themselves to be great fighters, committed patriots to their land, and we should support them. We should not put a single American life at risk. If NATO wants to put troops in, that's another story. But it better be European, and the Europeans better show they actually care who their next door neighbor is. Because right now, Ukraine, its fate is highly questionable, don't you think?
Well, I think it's going to be a long war because the corrupt class that runs our country doesn't want Russia to win, but it doesn't want it to lose.
Yeah.
And so what we're going to have, it's going to be Syria.
It's truly a sad, tragic, and deadly dangerous moment in our history. And Tom, I have to say, I've enjoyed our conversation. We always give our guests the last word. Take it away.
I appreciate the ability to discuss this, Lou, because, we do this day-to-day late-breaking news all the time. But between your experience and my experience, I mean, we talk to some of the decision makers here. We've seen it up close, and it's a nightmare here in Washington, D.C. And the reason we're so animated and so fearful for the future of our country, because we're seeing what goes on for real behind the scenes, and it's worse than anyone's worst conspiracy theory. The truth is often worse than what you fear. And the truth is this country is being run into the ground by an elite class that's antagonistic to the American way. And it's a dangerous time, and that's why we're upset.
Well, well said. And Tom Fitton is the great leader of the of Judicial Watch and does so much for all that is America and American. Thank you so much, Tom Fitton, President of Judicial Watch.
Thank you, Lou.
And thanks, everybody, for being with us. Be here tomorrow when Dr. Mehmet Oz is our guest. Dr. Oz is running for Senate from the great state of Pennsylvania, endorsed by President Trump and leading in the polls, and a great American. Please join us here tomorrow. We want to invite you to sign up for our Great America Show advisory and newsletter. Simply go to loudobbs.com. That's loudobbs.com, and click on the email newsletter button. It's as simple as that. And we'll send you our advisories and alerts as well as our weekly newsletter. I don't want to overstate anything, but I'm pretty sure you will absolutely sense at least a small positive change in your world outlook. We invite you to join us and stay in touch. Thank you. That's loudobbs.com. Thanks. God bless you, and God bless America.